Yes, thanks everyone for joining today. We will be talking about how to avoid common mistakes when benchmarking hospitals. Um, so many of these topics will be new for some of you, while they'll just be reminders for others. No matter where you are on that spectrum, we hope you can find some helpful tips today. Okay, so here's a quick overview of what we'll cover. Again, some of these will be an overview for some of you. Some of these will be a little more in the weeds, a little more nuanced. We're reviewing some common mistakes that we see when folks benchmark hospitals as a campus, use detail updates, solar net metering, district heating and cooling, COVID updates, and a few other things as well, and some helpful resources at the end. All right, and the goal today. Yeah, we want this to be helpful for everyone on the call, licensed professionals, so that you can ensure the scores of the properties that your clients are benchmarking are accurate and valid for submission and certification, and generally to enable your hospital to apply and be certified and approved more quickly, which means less follow-up, less interaction with our review team, and a smoother process overall. And so quickly, why get Energy Star certified? Energy Star certification opens a lot of doors for you and your property. Buildings who have earned Energy Star use an average of 35% less energy and produce 35% less emissions. This is especially great when you consider energy costs money. So it's a real win-win. So furthermore, 90% of Americans recognize the Energy Star symbol, and being Energy Star certified aligns you with the multi-decade history of integrity, trust, and sustainability. And the tool you use to get Energy Star certified is Portfolio Manager. So it is a secure online tool that thousands of organizations use to measure and track their building's energy use, water use, waste, and greenhouse gas emissions. So not just energy, we encourage you to track even more than that. So yeah, let's get started on the basics of the hospital property. I want to take some time to go over just the definition and make sure that sets the stage for the rest of what we'll cover here. So Energy Star considers hospitals as general medical and surgical hospitals. This can include critical access and children's hospitals, but they must provide acute care services such as those listed here: emergency medical care, physician's office services, diagnostics, ambulatory care, and they must have inpatient beds and offer overnight care. More specifically, there's some requirements around the eligibility of the hospital. So the whole hospital does not need to provide general medical and surgical services. However, at least 50% of the gross floor area must do so. Long-term acute care, specialty care, and ambulatory surgical services would count against that 50% since they're not considered part of the space type. And additionally, more than 50% of licensed beds must provide acute care services. So importantly, when benchmarking the hospital property, you must include the entire hospital campus and all spaces and property types serving it. So that can go beyond just a single building. This can include medical office buildings, non-clinical spaces like administration offices, food service, retail, hotels, even power plants or cogen facilities. So must include anything serving the hospital property type. And we have a footnote at the bottom there that it's worth noting that while specialty hospitals are not eligible for an Energy Star score or certification, they do still receive a comparison to a national EUI, or energy use intensity, which is just kBTU per square foot, from the Energy Information Administration's CBEX survey. Okay, so now we've covered some of those basics, we can take a look at some of the common mistakes that we do see. So as you might have guessed, mistake number one is using an incorrect property type. So those 50% rules that we just looked at, we do see hospital properties benchmarking that don't meet those requirements. So if less than 50% of the campus gross floor area is used for general medical and surgical services, or if less than 50% of licensed beds provide acute care service, the property is not eligible for certification. So it's not an and, it's either one if it's below 50%. Again, specialty hospitals are not eligible since they don't often meet this criteria. Similarly, VA hospitals often don't meet the acute care requirement since they tend to have more long-term care services. So yeah, note there are no exceptions to this rule. If a general medical and surgical hospital has a specialty hospital, for instance, a cancer center on campus, it still qualifies as a hospital in total since there are more acute care beds than cancer beds. So again, it's that 50% rule. You can have other space types. It's just at least 50% needs to be meeting the hospital definition. Okay, and as we kind of talked about campuses, mistake number two that we see here is excluding buildings on a hospital campus. So when determining what constitutes a campus, it's important to take a look at the collection of buildings to see if they function as a whole property as opposed to just individual structures. While buildings in a campus are generally owned and operated by the same party, it may not always be the case. So it's possible for buildings to be owned and operated separately, but still be required to benchmark as a campus. A property's metering configuration is not a factor in determining whether buildings function as a campus or not. Similarly, with buildings ownership management and the sharing of HVAC systems, buildings can be separately metered and still be considered a campus. One good rule of thumb is to determine if a group of buildings is a campus is to ask if the property's operations would be substantially affected if one building was relocated. So this is why even for buildings that are owned or operated by different entities, if they share amenities or offices, they're still required to benchmark as a campus. So if one building were to be relocated, the tenants in that building would no longer have access to the amenities of the rest of the campus. In the example on this slide, you would need to include every building shown within the broader red boundary here. Benchmarking just those buildings in the yellow boundary or really anything less than the full red boundary would not constitute the full campus. Another common scenario is when a group of buildings are completed in separate phases, and applicants will benchmark and apply for certification for different phases separately. So maybe you have a new medical office building going up. While the buildings may be completed and in use at different times, once they're completed and in use, the buildings in both phases function as a single cohesive property. So they operate together, they may share many of the same staff, they could be listed on the same website, share amenities, etc. And this, yeah, as you can see in the diagram here, this is true even if buildings are separated by roads. If they function as a whole property, then they should still be benchmarked together as a campus. Okay, so once you've determined your campus, how do you benchmark that in Portfolio Manager? So here's a just quick little slide showing you how to do that. So the table on top gives you options. So if your hospital only has one building, it's pretty straightforward. You just benchmark that single building. If your hospital has multiple buildings, you do have two options. The most common one we see are the steps laid out below. So you can benchmark it as a single property and simply update the building count in Portfolio Manager under Basic Information. So on the Details tab, you click that Edit button, indicate more than one building, and enter the value that's correct. Additionally, you could, if you have submetering for each individual building, you can add them as child buildings to the main parent property. And details on how to do that step by step are in the How to Benchmark as a Campus guide that is linked here, and you'll be able to follow that hyperlink in the slides that we send in the follow-up. Okay. Yeah, mistake number 3 is not keeping property use details current in Portfolio Manager. So this has become especially important during COVID, as many properties' operations have changed or shifted. You can see here that the values with the blue stars next to them in Portfolio Manager are used in calculating the ENERGY STAR score. So these must be updated. You don't have a choice there. However, it's still important to maintain all of the use details to give the most accurate picture of the property and help Portfolio Manager return the most accurate results. So again, the stars are required and mandatory. Everything else is recommended but not required. When updating property use details, if the value has changed over time, it's important to use the update with new information selection instead of correct mistakes. What this does is allow Portfolio Manager to understand the change over time and incorporate that into your metrics. So we encourage you to check out the Portfolio Manager 201 webinar for more info on updating and maintaining use details. And it's also important to log the date changes took effect in Portfolio Manager so that it can calculate an accurate time-weighted score for the application period. So yeah, we'd like to not get just an average for the whole application period, but the actual dates that changes took effect, and that way Portfolio Manager can accurately weight that during your application time. You'll see some tips on the side here for what goes into full-time equivalent workers as well. Don't include things such as visitors, clients, customers, patients, but you can include volunteers and other normal full-time staff. All right, mistake number 4 is reporting a net metered electric grid value. So if a hospital or any property generates on-site green power and consumes all of that green power on-site, so for instance, no energy is sent back to the grid, the process of benchmarking this energy is pretty straightforward. However, if energy generated on-site is sent back to the grid, you must determine if net metering is in place. So net metering is problematic because it does not express the entire energy consumption of the building regardless of the energy source. ENERGY STAR wants the entire consumption of the building no matter what the source. So this diagram on the slide helps visualize the different flows of energy. The energy flows circled in blue are the values that are needed in order to properly benchmark on-site solar generation. However, many net metering setups do not have access to all 3 of the flows, and you may only have access to the energy flows outlined in the red squares, so R and N. Just having access to flows R and N will not allow you to benchmark net metered energy correctly, but if you're able to obtain flow RU, which is renewable energy used on site, RX, which is renewable energy exported to the grid, or G, which is grid energy sent to the building, then you'll be able to isolate the required energy flows. And again, for anyone not familiar, net energy metering is where the utility credits you back energy sent to the grid by taking energy off of your utility bill. So it does not represent a holistic picture of what's being consumed. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here some sample data, which we will actually turn into a quiz. So anyone who is paying attention closely gets the answer already. Alice, do you want to go ahead and launch that? Yeah, so on the right side of your screen, you'll see some options here, multiple choice. I'll go ahead and read it out loud and give you about 30 seconds to respond. A building with on-site solar panels receives their monthly electric bill, which shows a net electricity consumption value of 120,000 kilowatt hours. That month, the property's solar array generated 40,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, 30,000 of which was used on site, and 10,000 of which was sent to the grid. What value should be entered in the building's grid electric meter in Portfolio Manager for that month? I'll give you about 20 seconds here. Just a few more seconds. And you want to close that out, Alice? Okay, so we've got our responses. Looks like the most common answer was 110,000 kilowatt hours. Let's see if that's right. So actually, yeah, that's kind of I think what you did was flip the action here. So the answer is 130,000 kilowatt hours. So this is the net metered value, which is the grid purchased electricity minus the solar electricity sent from the PV system back to the grid. So we know that 10,000 kilowatt hours of energy was sent from the panels to the grid, which means that the total grid purchase is 120,000 plus that additional 10,000, which would come out to 130,000. So yeah, instead of subtracting 10 from the 120, we're going to add the 10,000 to the 120. Okay. We'll move on here from net metering to district heating and cooling systems. So these are more common in hospitals than other property types, and they can be confusing, so they're important to benchmark correctly. If you choose to benchmark each individual building, then you will have to be careful with how you measure the common heating and cooling across those buildings. It is most likely that your heating and cooling system is located in one building and sends steam, hot water, or chilled water to the other buildings. So we've queued up an example here to step through the process. So say, for instance, you've got a 3-building campus where a boiler in building A takes natural gas as an input fuel to create steam and sends to the other buildings. So you would then need to submeter to measure both the natural gas going into the boiler and the steam used by each building. From here, what you would need to do is, again, measure the steam usage for each building, determine the percentage of steam used by each building, so not just the raw BTUs or therms, but the actual percentages of total steam. And then you can apply those percentages to the input fuel being used, the natural gas in the boiler. You would then use those percentages to update the natural gas meters for the buildings with those final numbers. And then, so this is the method accepted for certification. It's what we require. There are alternatives. You can enter it as it came to you from the local utility, but that's not accepted for purposes of certification because it's not as accurate as we need it to be. So again, this one lays it out with some numbers here in case it's helpful. We've got, for instance, let's say 120 kBTUs of natural gas, which is converted to 100 kBTUs of steam. So we know that these are the kBTUs being used by each building, 30 at A, 50 at B, 20 at C. And from there, you would want to figure out the percentage of steam used by each building. So if you just add that up to 100, you'd derive 30% from being used by building A, 50B, 20C. That's an easy example for us. Now you can then take those percentages and apply them to the input fuel, which was 120 kBTUs of natural gas. And applying that to the natural gas numbers, you get 36 kBTU, 60 kBTU, and 24 kBTU across the different buildings. And then you would enter those into Portfolio Manager. So this is how you would do it manually. We do have a negative energy consumption technical reference document and calculator that can also be used to perform these calculations. Again, it's linked here, and you can click on that in the follow-up slides. And you can always feel free to reach out to our customer support team, Buildings Help Desk, and the certification inbox. Okay. Next one we've got here is IEQ measurements. So yeah, last but certainly not least, please remember that IEQ measurements are required for all properties earned certification, including hospitals. We do recognize this is more difficult during COVID, and you may still reuse your site visit from a property's 21 certification, provided the property earned 21 certification, as long as that site visit falls within the application period for both years. We do know that hospitals may have had stricter policies in place for visits or other operational changes that impacted the taking of measurements, but we do still require it for certification. While we do request that it be taken in areas where workers are present, we understand that's not always possible, so it can also be taken in regularly occupied areas, either after hours or before hours, as long as the HVAC system is operating normally. And while we're talking site visits, a quick note on site visit reuse. So they can be reused for consecutive years, again, provided that site visit falls within the application period for both years. So for 22 applications, this means the 21 site visit must have been conducted in the last month of the period or within 120 days following the period ending date. So yeah, we've got an example here. If your 21 application had a PED of November 30th, site visit could have been conducted in December of 21 and then submitted. This site visit could be reused provided the 22 label year PED is November 30th. That would be 11 months following your 21 certification and still within both application periods. An example of when it couldn't be reused is if your 21 application had the same November 30th PED, but the site visit was conducted in October or earlier, it would not obviously fall within your 22 application period. And again, if your building is occupied but not yet fully reoccupied, as long as any portion of the building has occupants, you can conduct a site visit and take measurements in spaces that are normally occupied. And you've got another quick reminder, so the 120-day rule that was suspended for much of COVID has been reinstated effective January 1. So all applications must be generated, signed, and submitted within 4 months of the period ending date. So don't sit on those for too long. And we do have one more quick quiz here, true or false. Can a hospital-owned medical office building on a campus, a hospital campus, be benchmarked once, either as a standalone MRB or as part of the hospital campus? So do we think that's can only be benchmarked once, or can it be benchmarked twice? Another 10 seconds here. You can close it out, Alice. And for those not familiar, medical office buildings just had their scoring model updated, so we can now certify those again for the first time in 5 years or so. So this is a bit of a refresher. You can see the results on the right side. It's split down the middle. People aren't sure. The answer is it can be benchmarked either by itself or as part of the campus. So Yeah, medical office buildings are one of the only property types that can be certified twice. So it can have 2 decals in the window. So that's something helpful to remember. And lastly, we've got some additional resources here. We encourage you to test your knowledge of some of the content covered in today's webinar with the ENERGY STAR quiz for licensed professionals that contains some challenging questions that cover property-specific use detail calculations. For any questions not covered in today's webinar or in the Q&A session, folks are encouraged to use our existing FAQ database and post questions to our live help desk team by visiting the ENERGY STAR website. You can also access all of our upcoming webinars and recordings of past webinars by accessing those on the links on this page. And here's some of those links to the help desk, benchmarking starter kit, and certified building locator.